Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Raj Singhal. I'm president for the Australia New Zealand Spinal Cord Society. It gives me the utmost pleasure to introduce Professor Simon Darcy, who is from the UTS Business School from Sydney. He specializes in developing inclusive organizational approaches for diversity groups and understanding the social impacts of organizations and individuals. His research and industry collaborations on accessible tourism has been recognized for its outstanding contribution to the field through the World Leisure Organization's Innovation Prize, the United Nations World Tourism Organization publications on best practice. Simon has a long history of involvement in advocacy and volunteer boards. He's currently working on a number of projects relating to National Disability Insurance Scheme, National Disability Strategy, Disability Citizenship, and person-centered approaches. In his spare time, he enjoys spending time with his wife, Fiona, and going to theater, trying to keep fit, and getting out on the water. Like me, I'm sure everybody is very keen to hear what Simon has to say.
Thanks very much. It was quite daunting when James Middleton approached me and said, would you like to do a plenary session, thinking that it'd be full of medicos and surgeons and OTs and physios all looking at me and trying to work out how to improve my abilities right off the bat. And I've been so heartened wandering around to the different sessions and seeing a very strong consumer advocacy present, and just as importantly, some terrific work around peer support, long overdue, should have been in place for a long time. And I'm going to take you on a little bit of a journey. I'm going to start clicking. So I'm going to do a little bit of, in the disability studies space, talking about the personal and then moving into the political as we move forward. I must say on that front slide, I work only about 800 metres up the road here, and that is, your eyes weren't deceiving you, that's a Frank Gehry designed building we call the crushed brown paper bag. So please wander up the goods line and have a look at it. We're what they call a porous university, which means that you don't actually know when you're on a university campus because we're mixed in with the city. Very grungy, apparently, the millennials like all that sort of stuff. So I'm going to take you on a little bit of a personal journey that has a little bit to do with my life and my journey to get here. And then we'll move more on to how I ended up doing what I do. And yes, I have got a Master's in Environmental Planning and a PhD, which was in business-related aspects. And I am in a business school, so I'm sort of a little bit of an eclectic fit with what would be considered corporate business, but UTS Business prides itself on its engagement with social justice and non-for-profit sector, and that's where a great deal of our work is. We'll then go on to look at some of the research and some of the other things, but a little bit of an icebreaker. I love pop culture, and I was thinking of an interesting way to get you thinking about my journey as well. So I'm going to play 3 clips. Raj is my spotter. We need somebody to yell the name of the song out, and they'll get an little Australian prize. Hold the other one up. The Tim Tams are the big prize. The macadamia nuts and a variety of chocolates are other prizes. So, okay, first First song, you have to yell it out loud so Raj can do the spotting. Put your hand up and yell at the same time.
We're going on a holiday.
Dice Race is the band, not the song. Twisting by the Pool. Richard.
Who was that?
Richard, would you take one of the packs up to the back there? Do a run. Thanks, mate. Okay, we'll get on with the second one. Over there. And Wendy I saw Wendy's hand go up on that far side.
Oh, okay.
We could probably do two. What was it, Wendy? Power and the Passion. So if we can get a prize run over to Wendy at this time. Sorry, that other person, I shouldn't have jumped in, but I did see Wendy straight off. Wendy, overindulgence, really. Okay, third one.
There. Can you stand up? Sorry?
Did somebody get it? Did you get them, Raj?
No. It's the person in the back. Yep.
Yell out the song name. Okay, Richard up the back. Now, no more songs, but I'm after something specific that really brings those songs together. Any ideas? Sorry? Oh, movement action. Something more factual. Oh, there's dance involved. I might have to give it up. The Tim Tams might stay on one. One more. Got participation. Look, they all charted in... Chris, there we go. They all charted 83. They all sound just as good. Now, 83 was a big year for me for many reasons. I'm Chris, just bring the build. This is a group of guys I went through Teachers College doing physical education and science with. Next one. First year of senior rugby. Next one. I rewired my car with a cassette player, those that remember cassettes, that didn't chew up my cassettes. So that was very exciting. But it was also a year where my life changed, and it changed in an instant at this beach on this day 35 years ago. So when James contacted me, I just went, oh, look, I'll have to do it just for that. So it's one of these things I don't consciously think about a lot, but each year, generally, before being married, my parents and a mate or two would just have a little bit of a meal somewhere, something to drink. And it was, it's one of those moments that all of us in the room with a personal narrative around spinal cord injury is as important as birthdays and other things. So that morning, the night before I was at somebody's 21st, that morning my mother, who's also in the audience over here, said, "You've got to clean the eaves and the windows for me before you do anything else." And I said, "I'll just zip down for a quick surf." Well, I never quite did get to that cleaning those eaves and windows, and it was a pretty extreme way of getting out of it. So spinal cord injury means many things to many people. People talk about fate, kismet, destiny, etc. And I've even been told by some people, and generally some sort of evangelist Christian, that I must have done something really bad to be given a life with a spinal cord injury. When I'm describing it myself, I just regard myself as bloody unlucky. I was a lifesaver at the beach. I knew the beach well. It was big storms had come through and changed some things. And I was unlucky and lucky. Those of us that have had water-based injuries, I was face down for quite a while. I was lucky I was pretty fit. For some reason, they're all going over. I don't know why they're going over. Can we stop that, Chris? And a guy spotted me. He'd actually broken his neck 18 months earlier, but walked out, new spinal procedures, and I got out of that without having any more serious injuries. So, hospitalisation, if we can come back a slide, I don't know what's happening with these slides, they're kicking over by themselves. I spent I spent 6 months, which these days seems a long time in spinal. They're out so much quicker because the procedures are better. I actually was in traction, which I'm glad they don't use anymore, with drill marks going to the side of my head and whatever it was, 10 or 15 kilos hanging off it for 6 weeks, which was very exciting. Apparently I had a view of the Harbour Bridge. As soon as they took the traction out, they moved me to a view with no view at all of a car park. And hospitalisation was a blur. Some names stick in my head. Sister Liz Higgins and a number of the nursing staff, the wardsmen, surgical dressers, bladder and bowel training, Jean McPhail and the physiotherapy, and of course, and very glad to see John Yeo here today, and of course Dr. Sue later on, really being a positive influence in keeping spirits up and trying to make the best of our potential, whatever that really meant. 6 months, long time. Then off to rehabilitation, and rehabilitation was an interesting place. It was, Charles Dickens, the best of times, the worst of times. It was crazy for a lot of reasons, and the spinal cord injury guys and other wheelies and amputees tended to stick together. It was an all-come rehabilitation centre. We had a lot of fun, a lot of mutual support, and a lot of heavy drinking. And I don't say that in a funny sense, and others were also, enjoying prescribed and recreational drugs as well. I remember they tried to shut down our drinking sessions, and we picketed the front of Mount Wilga Rehabilitation Centre, and that sort of disappeared over the next few days. It was also a place where I worked out as a 6'3" gangly quadriplegic with an uneven break, more C4 on the left, that I wasn't going to continue my elite sporting path. And where I used to attend uni to play sport, I now had to use my other abilities if I was going to have any sort of a life. So I used it as a place to sort of understand what I could do for the future and get myself back into tertiary education, not being able to really continue the course that I was doing. Click again. And so, yes, I was a terrible murder ball player, and it wasn't as professional as wheelchair rugby is these days. Basically, my job was just to get into the way of anyone that had any talent and ability in the space. At the same time, click again, Chris, a wonderful thing called a Macintosh turned up. I had done a series of programming, basic programming with Apple IIs during my teaching degree, so I wasn't alien to computing systems, but this was sort of a revolutionary change and made computing a lot easier for a lot of us. And I managed to convince the occupational therapists that I probably didn't want an electric typewriter, and 3 months of paperwork, we got approval to purchase computers for the first time through Commonwealth Rehabilitation Service. And it was part of my schooling, in a sense, of what I would have to do now as a person with a disability. There was no NDIS, I wasn't compensatable, and what I would need to do to navigate through the system. So if we can go to the next slide. So I headed back to university and bring the first photo up. This was receiving my master's degree at Macquarie University, that's Justice Kirby. And I was really angry that day. And I was angry because I couldn't get onto the graduation stage and nobody thought that was an issue apart from me, and that was 1993. I didn't even know that DDA had come in at that stage or how to use it or any of those things. But later on, it became a very important part of my practice and my advocacy and engagement. So university was a great time, space and place to sort of rebuild a life. And there was actually a line in the Murderball documentary, if people haven't seen it. One of the guys said, for the first 4 years, I was useless. I was just learning how to redo things again. And so you really need that time and space to re-establish identity in a lot of senses. So I worked as a research assistant. There's a guy up the back, Duncan Wallace. I worked with him casually at times with his desktop publishing business. I had my own tutoring Microsoft Office packages to all sorts of people, and I knew I never wanted to do that again. And I was desperate for a full-time job, having worked casual consultancy in the environmental planning space. And I was lucky, next photo, this is me in my office, smiling this time, with the old, what was Coringo College of Advanced Education had morphed with UTS, and I was employed as a tutor in degree programs looking at sport, tourism and other things. So I was connected to what I did before, but differently. So getting a job was a fantastic, for all sorts of reasons. And in particular, go to the next page and bring it up. Okay, eventually through that job, I'd sent out a document, a questionnaire that I was about to do for a big research project, and everybody thought I was pretty good with what was in the questionnaire, etc., except for one that came back covered in red pen and look, you really need to do this, you don't understand that. And I thought, I better meet this person. And that's Fiona, she's just over there at the moment. And that's the thing about expanded social circles. So the more you can engage through voluntary means to improve your skill base, many people have got to I only had to change direction at university. Others with more physical work have to change everything they do. And so getting confidence in those skills to come back in. Come over, another click. And then the other thing I've always liked doing is pushing the boundaries a bit. And so Fiona actually gave me one of those red balloon things. And I thought I'd always wanted to have a crack. And they strapped me in, and I thought to myself, geez, that's pretty tight. And then there's 4 cars on the track at once. As we hit the bottom, the first turn at the bottom of the straight, and my head smacked against the roll bar, I went, why didn't they do it tighter? And I'm not looking happy there. I was absolutely terribly anxious going through. So as I said, I had a job, click over. And in that job, it became very apparent that the minimum qualification in a university these days in particular to have an ongoing full-time job is a PhD. So I eventually did a PhD, and that's my father, my mother and my sister, who family supports, everybody knows how important they are, and they were always there. Any siblings of people with disabilities get a bit of a hard trot. So, I know if I didn't mention my sister, I would have been in trouble again. So there you go. So getting the PhD really also changed me from having a job to really having a career. So click over. And career identity is one of those really important aspects. So I've been able to go to all sorts of places. This was Hong Kong, and a great deal of my work's not in disability. This one just happened to be. And it was an amazing conference where there was, literally billions of dollars worth of business being done around accessible transport systems. Bad luck, Queensland Rail weren't there. Okay. So in doing the PhD, we'll come back onto what I said. I really wanted to investigate. Come over a slide, Chris. I really wanted to dig into this understanding of why coming out of a medical system and then going into a very different social system, why a lot of us at times are overlooked, omitted, othered, and just plain out discriminated against. And the medical or the individual model of disability sees the person as not having agency, as terrible tragedy, as victims in a system. And from the social movement around disability, we need to change that worldview. So stairs are a pretty powerful metaphor, and that photo was taken, which is out at KCAE. I'd done some research around the tourism space and had a page 2 in the Sydney Morning Herald really saying it the way it was. And for those of you old enough to remember, answering machines, I came into work one day, and just after the day after this was published, and I had 5 or 6 really angry voicemail answer machine messages from people in the tourism and hospitality industries. They were fearful of retrofitting costs. Others were quite blunt in saying, we don't want to have to worry about the disabled in our business. We don't want those people at our businesses. I mean, very extraordinary stuff. And it was the first time where I really saw that hostility and wondered about that hostility. So in an individualised system, that victimhood, that individualisation, is focusing on our deficits. And so a lot of my PhD, we looked at what was regarded as normal, abnormal, all those sorts of things. And if you think of stairs as a metaphor, then if you're unable to walk down, it's because of the impairment. Well, from a social perspective, next build. Why was the building constructed with only stair access? It's a really simple little way to flip it around and start to understand that a person's impairment is not their disability, it's the social, economic, political and cultural structures that we have to galvanise and react against. Click. Stairs again, Art Gallery of New South Wales. Who's been to the Art Gallery of New South Wales? Show of hands. Okay, those of you with mobility, how did we used to get into the Art Gallery? Round the back. It wasn't just round the back, it was through the loading dock. People are there, the workers are there outside having their ciggies, stubbing them out. There's garbages. I mean, it's not the cultural experience everybody else was getting through a segregated entrance. So it took a lot of time and a lot of pressure, click, to get access to the front door. And actually, I find it quite joyous going up that arced ramp and coming down afterwards, and it's quite artistic in itself. And when I was in Europe, I didn't see the issues that Australians seem to have with heritage buildings. In Europe, they do this constant reuse and dynamic change. So at the Colosseum, there was awesome access. At La Scala, there was terrific access. And now the Art Gallery's caught up. Okay, clicking over. And that's not to say the Art Gallery is doing awesome programs artistically. Okay. So this is where I moved from the personal, and that was my journey. Everybody's got their own journeys. And really to say it's, we're in a political world, and there's a lot we need to do to improve it so we don't have these experiences. Click, and I'll get people just to read the next one. And so there are a lot of other discourses that we also have to guard against. So in the built environment, as an environmental planner, I used to work with architects a lot. And architects are trained for the aesthetic. Funny enough, they're not trained on functionality of buildings. So one of those of you that know University of New South Wales, the Scientia building, award-winning architecturally, awful from a disability perspective and awful from an events perspective for all sorts of reasons, and it's an events building. So they kept winning awards for crap design. But again, when you understand the aesthetic mentality, then you need to work with these people to improve things time and time again. Coming over, and click, click. So I was involved in some of the early meetings to set up PDCN and then spend time on the board. And I was really schooled well with people like Joan Hume, Bruce Moxon, Kevin Byrne, really being great mentors on how to bring about social change. And in fact, the constitution of that board was only people with disabilities could be board members, except for one position held for a parent of a child with a disability. And that's because at that time, a lot of disability service orgs were dominated by other professionals, many of the medical professionals, or people within allied health professions, and we felt our needs weren't being served particularly well at times around that. So every social movement's got great books, and this was one where the slogan's been used in others, but by Charlton out of the US, and showing great protest movement. And so there's lots of ways to bring about social change. Can we click over? So what I found myself professionally in was living in a professional world where I had a certain degree of respect and status, and then at the same time, in different parts of my life, being treated like second-class garbage a lot of the time in the way that we were spoken about, the way that our needs and desires weren't being filled. And it's quite shocking to be in a room where you hear somebody talking about them. And it dawned on me it was a cocktail party for some fundraising effort or something. And this person said, it was actually they used. They don't understand. And what they were talking about was people with disabilities didn't understand the resourcing issues this organisation was having. Well, in fact, it's because the pie wasn't big enough, but the professional wasn't seeing that. And that's a fairly shocking thing with people working in organisations like that, not understanding what it's like from a lived experience point of view. So click over. Sorry, just go back one for a sec. I'm just making, click back. I thought I'd missed one. So just to reinforce these social approaches that underpin the UN Convention, coming out of the UK with a sort of neo-Marxist materialist approaches, and I won't bother with too much of the academic stuff, promote agency for individuals to individuals and groups to force change on society, and a lot of this change has to be forced. So a person's impairment isn't their disability. The impairment, a disability becomes imposed on top of an impairment when disabling environmental and social attitudes are encountered. So I know a lot of you know this stuff, but others don't, so I've thrown it in. Click again. So when you hit barriers, you've got to bring about change. Click again. And you want solutions. So identifying barriers isn't enough. We want to bring about that change. Coming over. So was anybody else at this protest? Anyone know what we were protesting about? access to the Harbour Bridge. So this fight went on for literally decades. The last time I walked across the Harbour Bridge was 37 years ago when I was doing a prac teaching stint. We took kids on an excursion, walked across the bridge, Opera House, Fort Denison, blah, blah, blah. And there was always stuff in the paper about cyclists being disadvantaged. Nobody would write about us being disadvantaged. So Physical Disability Council organised this protest. We blocked the stairs. We stopped people using the stairs. We had a lot of support from various politicians. And the reason we were protesting was that RMS said, they didn't have the money to do it this year. So this is an organisation that spends billions. But even though it had been seen as a need, I'm angry about it still because now they're saying they've done it because we're getting the Invictus Games. Well, that's nice for the people from Invictus, but the rest of us want to be the first on it, and all those people in this room that contributed to advocacy. So coming over, direct action is one way of getting social change. Come over. The other is through using international conventions. The great thing about the UN Convention is that we're supposed to be monitoring and measuring social change. Click over. Many of you are from all over the world, and so a small number of countries haven't signed. The lowest level is signing, and the US haven't moved beyond signing at the moment. Canada have, north of the border, another reason you might want to move at the moment, we'll see. And so have a look at yourselves and see how you can hook into these areas of social change. And I want to just go through a few key ones. Click over. Okay. I was going to just talk, but you can read through those principles. Pretty basic stuff, really. Dignity, non-discrimination, full and effective participation, respect for difference, equality of opportunity, I'll get to the accessibility, gender, and of course kids. Kids get forgotten a lot of the time, particularly around equipment. They tend to grow and it's very inconvenient. They need new stuff and, all those things. So I'll just touch on what I think are 4 key ones. Coming over. So accessibility, and I've done here on transport because I like getting on the water and it's good to see things that are accessible and, trains, planes and automobiles. But it's also about ICT, information communication tech, which is so important. The big fights around that at the moment are the banks and Commonwealth Bank introducing a new touchscreen system that's not accessible for people who are blind or vision impaired. But the whole accessibility thing, any of us in the room with mobility disability, a lot of people think everything's fixed. We know it's not. And so there's a great deal of things that, and I've got a film clip in a minute about that. Clicking over. Personal mobility, the access to those assistive technologies that allow us to be as mobile as we possibly can. I saw exoskeletons out there and all sorts of stuff, all very exciting, but what's appropriate? And also that's a picture of me going through the ancient Rome ruins on a trekkie with 2 very fit lads dragging me through all sorts of things. I did ancient history. I saw where Caesar got it and I was very happy about that. Couldn't have done it except with this sort of assistive tech that's there. And access to that's timely, that's cost effective, etc. And the NDIS is hopefully going to really help those spaces. Let's hope it gets more efficient in doing that. Clicking over. And what I like to say and why I've named it Live, Work and Play, in a neoliberal society, if you're excluded from work, you're excluded from a lot of citizenship and having choice and control. So the rates for employment are appalling across disability. They're even worse for spinal cord injury, and they're worse the higher the level of injury you are, and what your background was before injury, or those other people that were born with some sort of congenital spinal issue like spina bifida, etc. I've been employed 26 years full time, and it's liberating in many ways that I've already said. It also gives you more economic choice and power. Getting a blip in the bank account every 2 weeks, very, very good. And then the other area is around cultural life, leisure, sport, tourism, the arts. So the enriching part of our lives that also give us other forms of identity, and really important forms of identity. So come over, and I've got a few examples that'll be coming up. So I've got to hammer Queensland Rail. They had me up there last year to do something for the Anti-Discrimination Commission, and they just purchased $5 billion worth of carriages that didn't meet disability standards for accessible transport, even though they paid for the consultants to provide the right reports. They've estimated 150 million refit. It'll be $500 million by anyone's stretch. But what I'd like Chris to do is click on the second screen for operations and service.
Wheelchair accessibility signs are on the doors, but the train left without him.
They're going to throw me off, and there it goes.
Richard Cordukes had just been booted off.
They didn't give us.
Not for bad behaviour or because he hadn't paid the fare, but because the independent 66-year-old is in a wheelchair.
They said, have you got a carer? I said, no. What do I need a carer for? So I'm getting on a wheelchair accessible train.
Nor did he need one at the 1988 Seoul Paralympics, where he won silver and bronze for Australia.
Greatest moments of my life. You're racing in front of 20, 30,000 people.
He's travelled on trains in Germany and Japan. But yesterday in Townsville, on the Spirit of Queensland, his own spirit was tested.
They said, well, you show me how you get in the seat. So I did.
In front of other passengers. Then he had to show he could get himself off the seat. He did, but a QR worker wasn't satisfied.
Left me on the platform empty.
He's now lodged a complaint with the Human Rights Commission.
For him to be discriminated in this way is an absolutely tragic set of circumstances, and he absolutely should have apologies from the Minister and from Queensland Rail.
Queensland Rail says it's contacted Richard to provide a refund and discuss future travel with a carer. That's despite the Minister launching his own investigation. But nothing can compensate Richard for missing his friend's wedding in Bundaberg. Jessica Mummy, 7 News.
Those of you that know Richard know that he's not going to let that go, and that's really good. That we may end up in a federal court action over these sorts of idiocies that go on. But anyone that's travelled knows the anxiety of getting to the concierge desk on the day, and it's whatever person is who is in front of you, their level of training and interpretation, that you're at the whim of, and it's horrific. So infrastructure is one thing, operations another. Click over. We've only got a few. We've only got a few things. I just thought I'd touch on the stuff that I like doing for a number of reasons. Click over. So I did my first report in this space in 1998, and it's called Anxiety to Access. Anyone that's travelled knows that anxiety. Generally, a lot of people have anxiety around travel in any case. Disability, it's quite extraordinary at times. Click over. And this was data that we forced Tourism Research Australia to include a disability module again last year. We had to force them. When I mentioned NDIS, they had no idea. And if we don't have baseline data, we don't know if we're improving. So click a build. Day trips, people with disabilities and those without disabilities are about even. Click a few times if you would, Chris. Disability actually travels 2 times more. But overnight travel, 23% less. International travel, 49% less. That tells us stuff's going on, and it's not our impairment. It's things to do with information being available, planning, etc. Click over. And third bar in, across all sorts of trips, People with mobility, wheelchairs or scooters, travel the least out of all the impairment groups. Okay, click over. There's some cool stuff happening mainstreaming. So many of you will know Martin Heng, who was working with Lonely Planet, and he had a spinal cord injury. He's doing some really good stuff globally. So Rio, they had a tremendous access information package put together. Some things with City of Sydney and Bruce Cameron around Easy Access Australia. Click over. We're not going to just click past the video because we don't have time for it. Click past auto mobility. I always have extra examples. Click past that and click to the sport and rec. We'll finish on this one. So in a travel sense, nobody goes to stay in an accessible hotel. That's our anchor, our starting point. It's all about experience. So there's some really cool stuff happening in Australia. The beach is so important, but really seeing a lot of movement on this with some really good stuff being done by Push Mobility and others. And this was some research I was involved in and just a trailer to a movie that was done off it. Play this. It's only 30 seconds.
My name's Plenary, and when I was just 11 years old, I became half man, half machine after being hit by a car. It's my belief that people with disability are like X-Men. We all have capabilities and talents that are unique, and we make the world a heck of a lot more exciting. But sometimes the world misses this. Some of the simplest and most universal human experiences can often be completely inaccessible because no one has thought about access needs for people with disability. It's my belief that the beach is our last domain to conquer.
Okay, major project went to surf lifesaving, done in 3 precincts. Merimbula, Bondi and Newcastle. Some really interesting approaches across all sorts of disability groups. The thing, the video I didn't show you on tourism was a destination-based video for the Catalonia region of Spain that have taken a whole of destination approach with all sorts of cool experiences, including hot air ballooning that I did on where you're able to transfer into a seat that then goes up on a hydraulic, set up so you're seeing outside the basket and all those sorts of things. And they're making the information freely available so that you can plan your trip and really enjoy yourself and do some really cool things without the hassle. So click to an ad that's now, I'm going to make this blatant, click over and I'll finish here. No, keep going, okay. Sargood Centre, Coleroy, Seb's outside at the stand. If you haven't visited it, go and visit it because it's a great boutique hotel resort accommodation, but they're bringing together yoga, surfing, all sorts of allied health professionals around a terrific location on God's own country on the northern beaches. And it's a really good crack by what was traditionally a medical health area moving into a social space with a focus on just having a good time with you while you're away and doing some really cool things. I'm just going to finish with a quick sum up. Spinal cord injury is devastating for the individual, family and the circle of friends, but it's not an end point, and all you guys know that. It's a beginning to creating new narratives if people are given the tools and focusing on the abilities and building new skills and capabilities. I was going to do a little bit on NDIS, but just to say that NDIS can be empowering. There's more money in the system, but be really, really well prepared before you go in there to ask for social inclusion. Ask for exercise physiologists. Ask for your social engagements, whether it's in sport or developing arts and community, because if you don't ask for it, you won't get it. Thanks very much.
Simon, thank you for that inspirational talk. We've time for few questions, I would say 3.
I'll just get a teacher to hold my microphone for me. A really great presentation. I really appreciated that. My question revolves around changing society from your perspective. There's different levers we can use, whether it's legislation, but I think, in my experience, getting down to really changing deep belief, culture, and things like that. Disabled people, enabled bodied people, I think there's always been that kind of them and us, so it doesn't apply. So I like to use the term, everyone is temporarily able-bodied, and it's going to affect everybody in this room at some point, especially with the ageing population. The last disability survey in New Zealand, 24% of people identified as being disabled. In your wealth of experience, what do you think is one of the most powerful levers of behavioural change if we're going to force society to become more inclusive?
I've seen change overnight where a person who was not particularly inclusive as a close family member experience disability for the first time, and everything changes in their world. Now, you don't wish that on people, but certainly disability awareness training interventions need to be driven and include a person that group that you are engaging with would recognise as a peer. And the research shows that time and time again. So we've done some really good training packages where we've done pre and post testing from the board right through to customer service level with different organisations. And it's that power of engagement and thinking, geez, that could be me. And having that peer involvement. A lot of people don't really know people with disabilities particularly the slightly older generation. We're seeing a change at the lower level of ages because schools have been mainstreamed. So disability is standard practice. So my thing would be, if you're able to go into organisations and bring about cultural change through peer engagement within the awareness training, but it's got to be locked into their strategic plans with responsibility at all levels, not leaving it to the bloody access and inclusion officer, because everybody will just look at them rather than everybody contributing and taking ownership.
Any more questions? Last one? If not, Simon, thank you very much for this wonderful talk.